this presentation was sort of prompted by the institute in Bombay that I did my PhD through. It celebrated its 50th anniversary. I would like to write on some advances in a particular theme that was part of my thesis then, 20 odd years ago. And now we have, better information or more information about it. So I thought, well, it's quite interesting to talk about Satavahana silver coinage. This is going to be a short presentation which is aimed at a general audience rather than specialized one, but also tells you something more, or the kind of interesting discoveries that we've made in the last 20 odd years with this topic. So at the outset, I must say that the silver coinage in terms of dynastic spectrum of the Satavahanas appears at a particular juncture. And it serves a purpose in as much as it sort of changes the coinage then onwards into a very different sort of coinage than what was it before that inception. How did that inception happen? What were the precursors? What were how did the currency then change? We will see in this presentation. This is just a glimpse into what the Satavahana coins looked like in the period before the silver currency was launched. And as you can see, the general characteristic of Satavahana coins in the period before the currency was launched was that the types were oriented towards regions. So each of the regions had different types. For example, the first coin there up on the left, this coin and this coin, they're all so-called elephant types because they have elephants on them. However, they come from 3 different regions. That comes from Nasik, that comes from Nivasa, Python, and this comes from Vidarbha. And they have, obviously, typologically, they have similar features on them. Like all of them have an elephant on one side and on the obverse, and a tree in railing on the reverse. However, the execution, the symbolic program, and the way the type characteristics are kind of arranged is very different. And these coins, even though on the face of it are of the same type, it's quite clear that they function as units of regionally oriented monetary systems. And the impetus that was provided for these currencies to function in these regions were contemporarily thriving urban centers. So all these sites, in Vidarbha there are lots of sites like Pauni, in Nasik itself, or Devasa and Python. They are all urban centers of the Satavahana period, and archaeologically and historically quite significant for the dynasty. Similarly, the one on the top is a typical coin of Junar, which has a very characteristic lion representation on it. And one of the very interesting features of how tightly their finds are concentrated in the regions is that Nasik and Junar are even today quite close by in terms of, they are about 100 kilometers apart, or maybe a little bit more than 100, between 100 and 200 kilometers apart. But in the local coin finds, you hardly ever find any Junar coin in Nasik and vice versa. So it's very, very tightly controlled monetary systems. So this is what the currency picture was before the inception of the silver coins. And as I said, it happens at a particular time. So the political setting in which this happens is about circa mid-1st century AD. And this is the onset of the trade with Rome. We know that the trade winds, the monsoon winds were sort of discovered, quote unquote, in about 40 to 60 AD. And this is when the trade with Rome starts. And the empire, the Satavahana Empire at this time is at a particularly weak juncture. It has already had a flourish for about 150 years. It has sort of gone becoming fragmented and becoming weak. And the entry points for the trade with Rome are all the ports that are situated on the western seaboard of India, which are under the control of the Satavahanas. And the fact that the empire is weak at this point then sparks a rivalry between the Kshatrapas in Gujarat, who are also part of the same coastal picture where the trade is landing. And this particular rivalry in mid first century AD is led by Nahapana, who's the Western Kshatrap ruler from Gujarat at this time. And since Nahapana was able to lay his hands on a good number of silver imports that were coming through the Roman trade, he was able to launch a major silver currency on the back of these imports. And obviously, because it was a sort of well accepted and standard currency, it had the advantage of spreading across the political interface, because people wanted to believe in a currency which was more reliable, more trustworthy. And this happens everywhere in coins in other parts of the world as well. That whenever there is a particular currency that appears, which is reliable, where people trust, it sort of takes off. So the currency sort of that was struck in Gujarat by Nahapana starts filtering into the Satavahana domains, which are quite weak at this time. But then that doesn't really stop, because Nahapana then sort of launches a military push with the currency, and then he extends his sway way right into the Deccan and all the way almost to the heart of the Satavahana Empire. And in this, he is aided by defectors from the Satavahana side, who was the feudatories of the Satavahanas. Some of them sort of side with him in order to. So this is the political picture that appears to in around mid first century AD, and that particular phase of Kshatrapa Satavahana rivalry is sort of brought to an end by a resurgent Satavahana power under Gautamiputra Satakarni, who defeats Nahapana around 78 AD. So this is what sort of tilts the balance. After that, for another 50 odd years, the Satavahanas are on perfect ascendancy, and Vasitiputra Pulumavi, who's the son and successor of Gautamiputra Satakarni, then consolidates the empire, kind of deals away with these defectors from the old stock, as it were, and then extends it away from the heartland, which was in Maharashtra, over to Andhra, Tamil, Kannada, sort of Karnataka. So it's sort of he extends his empire partly in response to the Kshatrapas pushing from northwest into he extends it southeastwards. So bringing more and more areas of the Deccan under his sway. So this is sort of what happens between 50 AD roughly to 150 AD. So in 100 years, the empire changes dramatically under the influence of this rivalry. We know that this is a Nahapana coin, and it's a silver drachma that was launched by Nahapana, and then there are very straightforward typological predecessors, and obviously this currency derives its inspiration in design terms from Indo-Greek drachmas. All of them have very basic type features. There's a bust on one side, there's an inscription that goes around the bust, there is an emblem or a deity on the other side, and then an inscription going around that emblem as well. And this was not something which is hypothetical, these connections. We know from the Periplus, which is a text, first century AD text, which describes the seafaring in the sort of wider Indian Ocean world, that there were coins of the Indo-Greeks, such as Apollodotus and Menander, to be found in circulation in Gujarat at that time. So those were very much around physically in the circulatory picture in Gujarat. So that's where the inspiration was drawn from. Of course, they are also very similar in Roman designs, and currently there has been a certain amount of shift between suggesting how Roman coinage and Roman art influence this, but there is this other representation as well. And when this sort of coin was, as I said in earlier, it started filtering through the political interface into the Satavahana territory. What happened is that they were counterstruck, and they were counterstruck by Gautamiputta Satakarni, but also by Gautamiputta Satakarni's predecessor, who was called Gautamiputta Siva Satakarni. So Siva Satakarni was also counterstriking Nahapana coins. And when these were first discovered in great numbers in 1906, they were given a very nationalistic spin by nationalist historians in India, by suggesting that they are kind of an embodiment of how the foreign Scythian Kshatraps were defeated by the indigenous Satavahanas. So, and in 1906, of course, when they were published in 1908, it was just after the partition of Bengal and the first sort of pan-India nationalist movement. So they had a traction of a certain kind in that interpretation. However, numismatically speaking, this is just a phenomenon where, for ease of convenience, the already struck coins of another dynasty are imported and then counterstruck by. And since we know that from other examples that this counterstriking was done at both ends, so Gautamiputta Satakarni counterstrikes Nahapana coins, but Nahapana also counterstrikes Gautamiputta Satakarni's coins. So it works both ways. So it's not something which had a tremendously political or nationalistic story behind it. It was something that was done for ease and convenience of trade and commerce, really. But what is important to remember at this stage is that because there was this currency that was reliable, this is what happened when it came into Satavahan domains. The Satavahana just started counterstriking and reissuing them as such. So in a chronological sense, these are probably the earliest examples of Satavahana currency, silver currency, because they were using Nahapana coins as templates. But having said that, as we shall see, the Satavahana coins that are issued on the same model are fairly different. So there has to be something in between. And when I was doing my thesis, I was slightly, intrigued by this question. Is that how did they go from counter-striking with their own devices to coins which were very different in terms of design from this? These are coins which are only, they have devices, they don't have any portraits, and they have an inscription, and they have a symbol on the back which has dynastic associations. So this was a kind of a dynastic symbol of the Satavahanas. So this is what happens. Usually you have the hill and the inscription counterstruck on the side of the face of Nahapana where the bust was, and the dynastic symbol then is applied on the dynastic symbol of Nahapana. So there is that kind of clear preference. However, in certain cases it's the other way around as well. So this is not something that was happening intentionally in this manner. And while I was doing my thesis, I found one coin which was a missing link, and that was a silver Satavahana coin, which was based on the same designs but was not counterstruck. And that was that one at the top. And what was also very significant about that coin was that it is so far the only Satavahana coin with a fully Sanskrit legend. And many years after my thesis, Andrew Ollitt published his History of Prakrit in a fantastic book called Language of the Snakes. And he has addressed this question of how Sanskrit sort of comes into officialese or official language, and in statecraft and instruments starts coming into these spheres of usage in 1st century AD onwards. So, and that coin sort of fits in the story. So instead of the usual Prakrit inscription, which reads Ranyo Gautami Puta Sa Siri Satakanisa, here the inscription is in proper Sanskrit, it's in Radnyo Gautami Putrasya Shri, and that's where the inscription on the legend on that coin stopped, and I didn't know what was following it. And what is also interesting is that there is in here the Putrasya part of it has a doubling of T. It is not Putrasya but Putrasya, and that is again a sign of classical Sanskrit being used in its inscription. When that coin was published, in the note that accompanied the publication of that coin in Numismatic Digest, the editor remarked that I was perhaps mistaken. And this is also a counterstruck coin, except that it is counterstruck well. It doesn't show any. And I tried to argue. I remember that this question was asked to me when I was appointed here for my job. In my job interview, the professor of Sanskrit asked me this question: how do you answer this? Your editor is saying that this is not a coin as you propose it to be, and I had answered it by saying that, well, first of all, although the type is pretty much the same, it has a hill and a dynastic emblem and a legend going around it, there is no parallel for this sort to appear in the counterstruck repertoire of counter-striking devices. Plus, there is, for example, in all the coins that are counterstruck, the hill is always shown as arches and not as balls, which is here. And similarly, the inscription is in Sanskrit, and there is no counter-striking device which has that inscription in Sanskrit. So these were my two answers. Be that as it may, 15 years down the line, a second coin, identical, was found, and this is in the collection of Amit Lomte of Pune, who I'm very grateful for allowing me to illustrate this. And here, the inscription is not only clear; it also re-emphasizes the purity of Sanskrit, because it says Radnyo Gautami Putrasya, and then the missing word is Shri Satakarnayaha, and it is absolutely pure Sanskrit. And what was also interesting is that there always has been a debate about whether Satakarni was a name that was prakritized or whether it has a Sanskrit equivalent. And this inscription shows that because it is used, and people were saying that it possibly is not Satkarni, it is Shatakarni. It's classicizing it. This coin proves that it was Satakarni, it was not Shatakarni, and Satakarni itself was Sanskritized in its proper genitive case ending for a E ending word. So Satakarni has an E ending word and root, and therefore that Satakarnayaha would be its genitive form. So that's what it shows. So this is the kind of missing link between the later Satavahana coins and the earlier ones, which were the counterstruck ones. So after Gautami Putra Satak, so what this tells us is that independent silver coinage of the Satavahanas was started by Gautami Putra Satakarni. That's what this will tell you. But his son then changes the design dramatically, and he sort of goes back to the model that he what was prevalent, and then he issues coins with his own portrait on. And those are significant because these are the earliest indigenous portrait coins that we ever have from the Indian subcontinent. And this is, as you can see, he's not a very handsome person, but it is pretty realistic. So no, he looks quite interesting. So from here onwards, the Satavahanas launched a bust or portrait type silver coinage, which was again struck to the drachma standard. So this is again very much comparable to the Indo-Greek or the Nahapana prototypes. So if you look at slightly closely to this, there are various characteristics that you see. So the typical features are that there is a fairly realistic portrait on on the obverse. And all Satavahana portraits show the king with two important features in terms of decoration. One is that he wears a forehead jewel right at the top of his head. And the second is that he has very heavy ear plugs, which makes it sort of his ears go down and almost down to his shoulder length. On the obverse, there is always a Prakrit Brahmi inscription, which starts here and it's in the genitive case, and it says Rayon Vasitiputasa Siri Purumavisa. So for some reason, they again go back to Prakrit. In spite of having made an attempt of instituting or issuing coins with Sanskrit legends, for some reason they go back to Prakrit. On the reverse, there is a feature that is again sort of comparable with Nahapana coins, where in the center there is a emblem which has some dynastic association. And people have interpreted this to suggest various things. However, fact of the matter is that it has the same devices that were used for counter-striking, an arched hill, and what we call as Ujjain symbol, with the two dumbbells crossing, with one of the Ujjain symbol circles is surmounted by a crescent. And that is a very typical Satavahana modification that happens very earlier on in the dynastic framework. So there is this Satavahana dynastic emblem in the middle of a composite emblem, symbol, and then on the back there is an inscription again, which is the same inscription as the translation of the same inscription which is on obverse, which names the king in the genitive. However, it is in a variant Brahmi script. The script is not Brahmi, as the same Brahmi as is used on the obverse, and the language is also not the variation of the Prakrit that you see on obverse. On obverse, it is usually a Prakrit called as Maharashtra Prakrit, whereas on the reverse, it's very clear that it's one of the southern languages. And there has been a lot of debate whether that is Tamil or Telugu. And of course, people in India, this is all has, how the past is appropriated has become very important, certainly in the last 20 odd years. And there is some sort of regional nationalism at work here by people who are trying to claim the Satavahanas as, on the basis of this, either this is a Tamil language or Telugu language. And then of course, sort of going back to the questions about the classicalness of these languages, as one of the parameters of regarding a language as a classic language is its age, like how far back it goes to. And these coins have been deployed in this debate about how ancient Tamil or Telugu languages are on the basis of that. Let us not get into the debate whether it is Tamil or Telugu. Having said that, it is absolutely certain that it is a southern language, and it has certain interesting characteristics. For example, there is a system for compound letters, which is very much different than the system which is used in the north. In the north, the compound letters paleographically or epigraphically were shown as a composite of two letters which are joined top to bottom. So, when you talk about a compound letter such as SK, the S would be on the top and the K would be at the bottom. So that's how they are represented as a single character. Whereas in the southern Brahmi, it is represented by following, the two letters are shown separately, independently, and there is a dot placed underneath the first letter, which is half pronounced. So that's how the composite letters are engraved. So there is definitely a shift to that kind of design on these. And following on from this, all the subsequent Satavahana rulers issued portrait type coins, and we'll quickly have a run through them. So Vasishtiputra Sivasri Pulumavi is, again, you can see that there is, a certain degree of difference in execution. I must confess that I find Sivasri Pulumavi's coins the best executed of the lot. So in terms of actual, representations, and even the condition in which they survive, they are rare, but whatever survives is in good condition. So it's quite plausible. Again, this is the first instance where the currency sort of, adds a layer of historical knowledge to us, because there was a debate whether Sivasri Pulumavi and Pulumavi were the same people or not. And in the 50s and 60s, a proponent of Satavahana history, a scholar who worked on Satavahana history, V.V. Mirashi, postulated that Shiva was just a title, and these coins were not known then. We only knew portrait coins of Vasishtiputra Siri Pulumavi, and then there were coins of Vasishtiputra Siva Siri Pulumavi known in other metals, and he postulated that these are the same ruler. The Siva is just an honorific. That was his kind of argument. However, the discovery of silver portrait coins made us absolutely aware that that was not the case, and Siva Siri Pulumavi was a separate ruler and distinct from Vasishtiputra Siri Pulumavi, probably his son. So that's the second ruler. The third in is Vasishtiputra Siri Satakarni, and right at the outset, I would like to mention that there are sort of similarities in engraving and hands of the engraver in these coins. So, for example, this particular variety of Vasishtiputra Siri Satakarni is quite similar to one of these coins. Like, it's the way it's been engraved. There is a variety amongst the coinage of Vasishtiputra Siri Pulumavi, which appears to be the same hand as Siri Satakarni, which is this one. So there is that kind of connection as well. So obviously there are more than one die engravers at work, possibly even more than one mints, but we don't know where the mints were located. We have no idea. The next one is Vasishtiputra Sri Skanda Satakarni, and again he is, the typology is very much similar. These coins are, Siri Pulumavi, Skanda Satakarni, they are rarer coins. They are not found in as many great numbers as Pulumavi is, for example. The next one is Vijaya Satakarni, and again we have two distinct hands here, where I'll tell you something more about the hairstyles and everything in a minute. The next king to have a very profuse silver issue is Gautamiputra Sri Yajna Satakarni, and here we see that I'll say something about how the portraits are depicted. As we saw, as I told you, they have these two major features which remain constant for every king, such as the forehead jewel and the big earplugs. That remains constant for everyone. However, then there are many other variations. Sometimes you find the king has facial hair. We can see up here, and also here you can see that there is sort of sideburns or side locks of hair. This is a very distinct headgear, which has the head is tonsured, and it is left in 3 tufts, and the middle tuft of the hair is then made into a man bun at the back, and the side tufts are sort of integrated in underneath the middle tuft. So, and that is a typical head dress that was worn by the warriors, the Kshatriyas. So, and it is called a Kakapaksha hairstyle. So the Kakapaksha hairstyle is seen on some of these kings. So for example, Yajnashri Satakarni has it, Vijaya Satakarni has it, and Skanda Satakarni also has it in the same way. So as against that, there is a second hairstyle which is more frizzy, and you can see that it's more like it's not the head is not tonsured here. It's definitely it's full of hair. So there is that particular kind. Sometimes it has the full head, but a kind of a man bun as well, what is called a tuft or a shikha. So these are all different sorts and kinds of head dresses that one sees on these coins. Quite interestingly, these are not really visible so clearly in the sculptural, the sculptural art of this period. You don't really see all these details. So this is something very specific to royal portraiture. In this one, you also see that he has a mustache. So there are these, many variations of this particular king. There are portraits which show him as a younger king, a slightly older king. So maybe that's the reason is that because he had a longer reign. The last two kings of the dynasty that struck silver portrait coins is Madhuriputra Siri Pulumavi. Quite interestingly, he is the first king for whom fractions of portrait coins are known in greater numbers than full units. Full units are only 2 or 3 known, but fractions are known in much greater numbers. So there is an indication of how the coinage was operating, changing here in a way. So you have the full unit, the half unit, and the quarter unit for this king. And in the thesis, I could document. In fact, interestingly, this coin is from Michael Michener's collection, and he had misidentified it in one of his books. So so I rectified the attribution to Madhuriputra Siri Pulumavi. When I did my thesis, there were no inscriptions known of this king apart from one where only the name Pulumavi appears without the metronymic. But now, after the great discovery of the stupa at Kanaganahalli in Karnataka, in Sannati, there is an inscription of Madhuriputra Pulumavi found in Sannati in, I think, its 15th regnal year. So there is inscriptional evidence available for this king as well. And the last king to issue portrait coins was Gautamiputra Siri Kumbha Satakari, and this was unknown. So this is where the beauty of Indian coinage is that there is, give 5 or 10 years or 5 or 10 days, there is always something new coming out. So these were not part of my thesis, but since I did my thesis, they are known in the last 10 or 15 years. So these are probably the last of the Satavahana portrait coins. So that is again this one. These two are also from Amit Lomte's collection. So quite important coins. So to conclude or to end, what exactly do we know? How do they add to our knowledge? What is the significance of Satavahana silver coins? Well, first of all, as I said, they're the first indigenous coinage with portraits of the rulers. There's no portrait coin before this to actually show an indigenous ruler in its kind of indigenous headgear or drapery or whatever. The political and monetary backdrop in which these coins were issued is quite interesting, as we saw. What they do is that they sort of co-opt the silver regime that was introduced by Nahapana, and as a result, the characteristic that I first talked about, the regional orientation of coin types and the regionally circulating with tight regional circulation, that feature sort of dies down, and the currency regime under the Satavahanas moves towards a more universal regime. So as against a silver denomination, there is a universal copper or potin mixed metal denomination also issued, which is an elephant type coins, and so it becomes essentially a bimetallic currency. The regional characteristic of Satavahana coins survives in Andhra and Karnataka. However, it is nowhere as prominent as it was in the Deccan. So there are still regional coin types in base metals, in lead, in these parts, and you can still group them by regions, but those regions are quite less in numbers as against the pre-launch of silver coins. The art of the portrait is quite important, and the importance of language and script and how they feed into the wider discourses in terms of ethnicities and identities, that's quite significant. And as I said, it has the coinage, the discovery of these coins has definitely helped us in establishing the identity of some rulers. There were debates about the existence of them, and then the coins proved that they did. So that was quite important. The connections within styles that I mentioned, the overlaps of hands, gives us a insight into the dynastic sequence. Because, for example, all the coins between Gautamiputra Sri Satakarni's reign and Gautamiputra Sri Yajna Satakarni's reign are all Vasishtiputras. And again, one of the historians working with the dynasties suggested that if they share the metronymic, they have to be uterine brothers. But 6 uterine brothers ruling in succession is rather impossible for about 75 years. So there must be some overlaps and some, it's not impossible that a Vasishthiputra might have married another Vasishti and generated another Vasishthiputra. So that's not, it's not out of the bounds as it were. But that kind of sequencing, what comes, how do you establish how many, between these so many Vasishtiputras, who came first and who came later, can be shown through this connection of their portrait styles. So there is a direct utility in establishing the dynastic sequence. And of course, as I said, the most important aspect is that the move from regio-specific to a more universal coinage is mapped in this period by it sort of happens on the fulcrum of the Satavahana silver coins. And from first century, second century, beginning of second century onwards, the numismatic picture of the Satavahanas is a very different one than what it was before 50 AD, let's say. Okay, that's about it.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more? Happy to have any questions.